This is one of the real-life inspirations for the Raiders Temple, and it's not in Chachapoyas, it's Shireen the Wantar. Hello everyone, welcome back, and today I'll talk about the Raiders Temple in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and now the Great Circle, and it's often been called the Chachapoyan Temple, but that was a name that was added kind of after the fact. In general, the opening of the original movie was just South America in 1936. Later on, it was added to canon that it was the quote-unquote Chachapoyan Temple, and as somebody who works in South America, and works in Peru in particular, that has always been kind of an odd discovery that it's not actually a Chachapoyan Temple in reality. And I think David West Reynolds of kind of the Star Wars guidebook fame, and who's trying to put together a documentary, has kind of made some comparisons to Chachapoyas and sort of in a way to try to make sense of it. And I suppose one could, but I would say that it makes more sense to compare it to, well, several things. A few Mesoamerican and other South American elements, but mainly there are elements of Chavin the Wantar, which is a site that is known as was historically known as the quote-unquote mother culture of Peru, the source of it. So think of, if you're familiar with Mesoamerica, think of like the Olmecs as being one of the earliest, most notable kind of cultures that led to kind of later developments in that region. In Peru, Chavin de Montar has kind of a similar cachet as this really influential site where it's a temple, and within an actual kind of labyrinth of gallery chambers and tunnels, it would lead to this giant deity. It's a place that I visited as well, and it also has connections to a few figures that may actually unintentionally or kind of had a component, an unexplored component, in influencing the development of Indiana Jones. Now, Indiana Jones has a lot of known inspirations. Interestingly, the father of Peruvian archaeology, Julio Teo, was also sometimes considered the first indigenous archaeologist
Relax.
in the Americas. Dressed a lot like Indiana Jones as well. So, anyways, I'll get started. Yeah, and also another component is the fact that there's one of these tenon heads that is actually from Chavin the Wantar. So it's not, I'm not sort of just making it up so much as there is an actual connection in the film of one of these elements being featured from an actual site featured in this movie. So here's a close-up of Julio Teo, and again, I know a lot of people look at a bunch of other real-life archaeologists and say, oh, that looks like Indiana Jones. Maybe he was a real-life, Indiana Jones. Maybe it's, Sylvanus Morley. Maybe it looks like Junius Bird. Maybe they look like Roy Chapman Andrews. But all of these other characters don't actually look like him or don't dress like him, right? The fictional inspirations, in Circuit of the Incas, Sierra Madre, China 1945, absolutely. But in terms of real life archaeologists, I would say Julio Teo looks closest to, and also worked in South America, and also was the father of modern Peruvian archaeology. And he's got the hat, he's got the leather jacket, right? He, even in his professorial garb, or curatorial garb, he was the curator of the Anthropology Museum in Lima. He has the hat still. He's got the circular glasses, So I would say Julio Teo is a better example, and also he's got the other two references I mentioned with the sun disk, and also the his work at Chavin the Wantar. But anyways, his story goes is that he was originally from kind of he was indigenous, and he's from a kind of a place called Guaroquiri, very famous for a very influential, very meaningful kind of manuscript that gave us a lot of information about pre-Hispanic society and kind of worldviews. But even more than that, he's from that. He may have seen, depending, some of my colleagues kind of tell this. There's a story of him, as a child seeing or being a part of some sort of archaeological project as just a member of kind of the local town. But then he became a doctor. He became a medical doctor, not a doctor of archaeology, medical doctor, a real doctor. And then, but he kind of saw in a report or an article or something like that that there were these there's this material from where he worked or where he was from as a child, and so he already had an interest in archaeology. He decided to go back and do archaeology, and actually managed to get funded to go do a master's at Harvard, and so he became an archaeologist, and he went back and he worked at a lot of sites that are now known as major sites in Peru, and so and then he made. Meanwhile, other foreign projects were running. The Germans, there were American teams in the region, but he led and he mentored a bunch of Peruvian archaeologists, Peruvians, to kind of study and protect and to conserve Peruvian culture and history. And yeah, his work continues to influence us all. Many of us, when we're citing a lot of work, we do reference back to Teo and or his students as well. So statue, right? That frightens some of the other workers, people that guides that Indy's working with. They all run away except for Satipo and Barranca. But the influence for this one, it's not really Peruvian or South American in any way. It's more of a at first sight, for me, when I rewatched the movie, it was before Great Circle came out. I thought, that is a very Mesoamerican figure, right? Or Mesoamerican looking figure, inspired kind of figure. And I actually found this kind of as comparison. This one's actually found in 2013, so it's not a direct influence, of course. But in reality, the circle, they kind of tried to remodel some of that, and I think David West Reynolds also talked about it. It doesn't really look like. It's not also very Mesoamerican. It's like a little hybrid mix, and there may have been Hawaiian elements being. And a big reason why I also want to emphasize that it's not really Chachapoyan, despite being called that, is that in the original movie in Raiders, there's nothing about it that is Chachapoyan. Right? Just comparing the images on the left versus the right. In actual kind of Chachapoyan iconography, there's really not many fanged figures, if at all. Whereas in the Raiders Temple and at, let's say, places like Shavin the Wantar, there is a fanged deity. And it's more subterranean in Shavin the Wantar, where you go into a set of tunnels and you end up leading into this area where you would encounter this fanged god that's installed inside the temple. There are also kind of spaces for light to go in to the subterranean area, and and there's actually a tenon head, this fanged figure that you do see at the site that is also mounted in the Raiders Temple itself. In Chachapoyas, right, you have much more kind of circular architecture, like at Cuelap on the far left, or you have these large statues that again are not don't have any fangs, or you have cliffside components that again are not really in the Raiders scene opening. That said, there have been some modifications, I believe, in the expanded canon. Like there's that World of Indiana Jones visual kind of dictionary type book that does kind of make an illustration of it that is a little bit more akin to a Chachapoyan structure. But yeah, outside of that, it's really kind of just a namesake a name placeholder that's been given to it for some reason. Not quite sure why. The Great Circle might also be making a slight modification to it at the outside of the temple, where you can walk around. You can find a few artifacts, a face neck ceramic, another kind of more domestic type ceramic, I believe, and a mace head that he attributes to being maybe defense against the Inca. But that said, you also see this kind of circular wall, and at the back you have a more straight-sided wall. So this is an example from Cuelap, which is in Chachapoyas. So it seems that they are kind of trying to throw elements back in there. But again, interestingly, if you look at the way it's designed in the game, the blocks don't look anything like the inside of the temple, which is an almost one-to-one copy of the Raiders Temple. And though granted, even the Raiders Temple doesn't have architecture that looks like, or blocks that look like things from Shavin the Montar, but are more kind of Inca and stuff. So in all honesty, it's kind of a mix, but the Chachapoyan element is probably the smallest element of all the influences that affect that inspire the scene that we see. So while I am saying that it looks a lot more of the temples, it would be more akin to Shavin the Montar than Chachapoyas. The opening entrance into the Raiders Temple, it has stalagmites and stalactites, and it's very cave-like. So it seems like in the Raiders Temple, built within a cave system. And that's really not as much of a feature in South America. South American caves generally don't feature as much archaeological material in comparison to, let's say, Mesoamerica, where there's a lot more investigation and also kind of presence of archaeological material because they're considered to be kind of entrances into Chibalba, into the underworld. So, yeah, to some extent, it seems that the influence here is also coming from Mesoamerican. So I'm just giving you a few examples from different places, including one that has like a sculpture of Tlaloc, the rain god. That said, there are one or two places that could fit the bill a little bit more in South America. One of which would be Huayna Picchu, who's Temple of the Moon, and so this is near Machu Picchu, and doesn't really look quite the same. Doesn't really have the same kind of cave system that you see in Raiders. Though, if you take a look at the entrances, and the stonework, that is a feature within the Raiders Temple. A lot of the stonework is very much taken from Inca architecture. So, a little bit of mix of everything going on. And then as you go further into the temple, you encounter this giant kind of gold disc inside this, I think, a net of ropes that creates this star pattern, I guess to emphasize that it is maybe the sun. And this is actually based off of the sun disk given to the Peruvian president Echenque in 1853, and it became the symbol of Cusco, so the Inca capital. The modern day capital of Peru is Lima, but the historical Inca capital was Cusco. And then it was lost. Julio Teo, who I mentioned, tracked down its last known location to Chile, but lost the trail, and it was given over to the Smithsonian Museum by a collector, then later returned to Peru in 2021. So the actual provenience of it is unclear and more of a contemporary symbol, broadly kind of pre-Incan. It's really where it comes from, why it exists, what it's supposed to be, not really clear. It is essentially the same thing that you're seeing in this part of the Raiders Temple. It's also connected back to, and might be what the original influence for the folks that did the set design. They might have actually been influenced by Secret of the Incas, which is the Charlton Heston movie that influenced the development of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And a lot of people on the crew were told by George Lucas and Steven Spielberg to watch this, Secret of the Incas, China 1945, and I believe Treasure of Sierra Madre on the regular, in order to kind of get an understanding of what kind of of the kind of vibe that they were going for in terms of what kind of movie they're creating. And in Secret of the Incas, the big MacGuffin is this thing called the sunburst, which is based off of this sun disk. Yeah, so here we have a connection both to Indies influences, inspirations, real life archaeology, and Julio Teo himself. For the faces on these walls, it's really hard to say. In the Great Circle, they actually reduce the amount of variety than the original movie. The original movie had like a bunch of different faces from different locations, including one like a cutout of the staff deity at Tiwanaku, which is a major site in Bolivia, but also some Mesoamerican designs as well. Mesoamerican fanged figures and maybe South American fanged figures. I couldn't really identify like all of them. Some of them seem vaguely familiar. Some of them are a little different. This is on the wall in the actual movie, and you can see the slightly greater variety that you might find, including the tenon head that's found at Shavin the Wantar on the right-hand side. Some more images to compare between the movie and the Great Circle, and the kind of variety of faces that you see. And in terms of why those faces are there, it seems that they're based off of tenon heads, essentially. So they're these, they look like, faces mounted on the wall, but they're actually kind of long. There's this kind of long rectangular shape behind it where they're inserted. And yeah, they're very much found in a variety of different sites, very notably Turin the Wantar, as I mentioned, that does have that kind of round-headed fanged face, but also Tiwanaku also has a bunch of faces like that, mounted in a similar fashion. So in the movie, they're turned into like the mouths are turned into the locations where the darts are fired from. So which I guess fits into the whole theme that the Jovitos later on at the end of this scene in the original movie they used blow darts. So and then as we turn towards the main kind of altar area with the steps going up and the two flanking figures with axes, that is very, very kind of strange setup, partly because of just how small the idol is relative to the grandeur of the rest of the chamber, but at least from my perspective. But also the flanking figures aren't very Andean or Mesoamerican in any way. They look very kind of old world. They look very either like a large statue you'd find in Asia or in Europe, right? Where you not necessarily even Europe, but like the style of it. The axes look more like halberds rather than a kind of clubs, maces, and spears or weapons that you would find. A few more close-ups of the guardian figure in the movie versus in the Great Circle. In Raiders, the actual movie versions, they almost look like they have beards. Right? They look almost like European figures that were refashioned to try to make them look more like something out of South America. But in the Great Circle, they've changed that to just being kind of elements of, I think they're like to create like a fierce face, but they very much look like beards in the original movie. And again, the axes look more like European halberds or something like that. Surrounding the actual idol on the pedestal that it's on are a bunch of U-shaped seats, and believe it or not, that's a real thing. That is very much a real thing from Ecuador. So not from Peru, but from a little bit further north. These are Meteño seats, and they have been featured at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. Whether they're on display, I don't know. So if you are ever visiting there, if you're in Washington, it might be worth seeing. Washington, D.C. Might be worth taking a look. So there's actually from around AD 500 to 1500, and yeah, this example on the left are from Cerro Jaboncillo and Cerro de Hojas, located on the coast of Mantas in Ecuador. So Yeah, I was surprised too that it isn't actually a real thing, but here we are. Though I think they did change the design a little bit in terms of the faces at the bottom. So the figure that's holding up the seat is a little different. They had a bit more moss growing around it. For comparison, it doesn't. These types of seats wouldn't be found in let's say in much of the Peruvian Andes or in Mesoamerica. Just to give you one example, here's the Tlaloc Jinkian, the Inca stone seat at Sacsayhuaman in Peru. And on the right, you have an example of a Mayan throne, throne 1 from Piedras Negras in Guatemala. So, yeah, looks nothing like it. So, very, very specifically based on that culture in Ecuador rather than being a broad phenomenon, which is actually quite amazing. It's not something that those types of U-shaped seeds aren't really very well known nor well studied. So somebody was reading deep in terms of trying to find unique designs when they were designing the sets. So this tenon had actually discussed recently in the other Tomb Raider Netflix series breakdown that I covered, but the face itself above Indy it's very different between it's a little different very different to me as an archaeologist and somebody interested in iconography. Not so different if you're just kind of looking at the two faces, but you can see that it's much more animalistic. Animalistic is not the term. Zoomorphic. No. Let's just say it looks a lot more like an animal in the original Raiders scene. And if we're looking for a real life comparison, I would say that it does kind of look like one of these tenon heads from Shavin the Wantar. You can see the way the fangs are, the way the nose is. Outside of South America, or if I didn't try to find a South American comparison, the original Raiders face, above Indy, that does look more like something more Asian to me otherwise. But I don't think there is actually a stone sculpture or architectural element that's on that scale and looks like that. So this is actually based off of the Dumbarton's birthing figure, and the people have talked about it before, but I think not as much in recent years, so I'll go through it again a little bit. It's originally thought giving birth while crouching. They turned it into kind of more of a gold figure with eyes with robotics that could move and follow the Indy as he walks through the scene. But in terms of the original, even though it was thought to be Aztec, it's now considered to be maybe a modern fake. So much like the Mitchell Hedges crystal skull, and among other things, might also be one of those kind of 19th century, early 20th century kind of fakes. And that's it. And that's about it for this time. I hope you enjoyed it. I've been enjoying replaying the game in order to make these recordings. I hope you have a really wonderful, happy new year. And I'll continue making more of these. I'll continue to work through the different levels. There are different layers that I go through. The Raiders Temple is, it's a quick kind of introductory recap of the Raiders opening, but the other ones will have a little bit more difficult because there's a lot more material there, and a lot of it's based off of real things, so which could make it easier in terms of identification, but also just seeing what I should focus on. I might focus more on kind of the rooms, the locations, as opposed to trying to nitpick through all the artifacts and objects. And, for my first 3 Tomb Raider videos, it took me months and months to identify them because they're so jam packed with really cool objects and motifs. May run into the same issues, so I might focus on, let's say, just places first, and then we'll go through the specifics of maybe individual objects. Maybe found like the lost relics of Europe, lost relics of Asia, things like that. Anyways, enjoy a wonderful start to the new year. Happy 2025, everyone, and happy 2024 also. Alright, take care.